Hello, so very nice to be here with you, Vicki. We are here in Žďár nad Sázavou, and I have the great pleasure to host you here. And we met thanks to a project which is called Roundabout Europe.
Yes.
You were here for a long time. It was a pleasure. You're here again. Came back.
I'm very excited to be back.
For something which is a feedback about the project we had together, and we take the chance just to try to know more better what was your work about and how you worked on your performance. You're a choreographer, you're also a new circus person, very deeply.
Yeah.
We met her traveling with all the practical to all the castle. So really, person of the situation, new circus.
Lifting and carrying is one of my strengths.
And everybody remembers you for that, but not only. So you're new circus, dance also background.
So my background is primarily new circus. My training was in circus, but after I graduated from circus school and started working, I ended up working more in dance and theatre than in circus. So I don't have a dance training, but I have incorporated it into my practice.
Yes, and it's very visible thanks to the people you are working with.
Yes.
And especially on the project we'll speak about. But so as the director of the company Upswings, you're prepared here in the castle of Žďár in residency, the performance Catch Me.
Yes.
With somebody who has a background in dance and somebody who has a background in new circus and confronting their experience.
Yeah. So there were two performers, Susan Kempster, who was a contemporary dancer with a long history and background in contemporary dance as a dancer and a choreographer herself. And Susan was 60. And then Jerone Reid, who was literally just graduated. So we picked him up straight out of college, and he was physical theatre, circus and hip-hop dance background. Yeah.
And what interested you in confronting those two styles?
So it wasn't just about the style of movement, it was about the people. I was really interested in making a piece that brought together these two different generations.
Yes.
And two different ethnicities. So Susan is white European, Jerone is dual heritage. And I discovered actually through the process, I didn't think I articulated this or understood it at the beginning.
Yes.
But what I was really interested in was looking at intimacy and who we allow to be intimate with each other. And these two people kind of represent groups of people that you don't often see together, let alone intimacy between them. Yeah, so that was what the piece was really exploring.
So I felt, following you speaking about and seeing your work, that the urge of this project is this connection between elder woman. She's a beautiful dancer.
Yes.
Really, we enjoyed seeing her. And this young man, full of energy and having a completely different approach to movement. But this urge of confrontation, we felt that was strong.
I think it was so. Primarily, it was about the two different people, but two different people bring two different sets of life experiences and two different sets of movement practices. So in the piece, we were kind of moving between a confrontation where these two movement practices and ways of moving, these two different bodies met each other and didn't fit, and then the moments where they just kind of melted into each other. And that was the interesting thing about the piece, is it didn't settle on one thing. We didn't want to kind of settle on one story or one idea. We wanted to look at all the different possibilities of the way that these two bodies might come together or not come together.
So you went primarily through only movement, body confrontation.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously there was a lot of dialogue in the process. We talked a lot about the themes and we worked a lot with improvisation.
Yes.
But with each improvisation, we would talk a lot to set a framework for that improvisation that would hopefully take us in the direction that we wanted to go. And we talked a lot after each improvisation to find out, just to help pull it into focus. So there was a lot of talking, there was a lot of arguing as well.
Confrontation.
Absolutely. And also, you know, that thing, we were in a space where all three of us were coming from different movement practices. So Susan from a really strong contemporary background, Jerone from this kind of physical theatre circus background, me coming from my mixed background as well, and all of us kind of having different things that interested us, but actually finding lots of things that connected us in the way that we got excited about the movement practice.
And how it was, you tasted this different of movement. It seemed that it's this taste of movement that brings the images.
Yes.
Yes. And on which kind of images you work through the movement?
So we, on the first day that we met, we talked a little bit about why I wanted to make the piece. You know, the starting point for me was not just age, there was gender and ethnicity as well. I told them about the inspiration. I remember walking down the street with my brother and kind of seeing the way that certain people were looking at him, you know, with fear, like he was a threat. You know, and for me, he's my big brother. You know, I grew up with him. He's a father. You know, he has 2 children of his own. I see the vulnerable side of him. So it got me thinking a lot about strength and vulnerability. So we talked about the themes very generally, and then we found some kind of key words that were either provocative for us or interesting for us, and then started to build improvisations that would help us find a movement quality that attached those words and those themes. And the interesting thing was Jerone and Susan would always find very different languages. So
with the same word,
with the same
completely different
imagery and ideas and ways of moving that were stimulated by that. I filmed everything and then started to pick moments where I saw the flashes of what I found really interesting, and then we try and find our way back to it, and never could, but then we'd find something else in that journey back. But language and the reaction, the physical reaction that you feel from that language and those concepts and those ideas were our starting point for building the movement sequences.
And you were working with single words or with sentences, meaning that a certain kind of articulation already?
So we were often working with single words, and sometimes we'd work with the idea of equality.
Yes.
And kind of quite often putting 2 things next to each other that might not feel like they would sit comfortably next to each other, and see what that, see how that unfolded. Working with full sentences didn't work for us because it defined things too much. And the important thing for me about the piece was that we never got to a point where their characters or personas were so defined that people felt they knew who they were and who they were in relation to each other. That kind of kept shifting, so people couldn't sit comfortably and go, oh, he's that and she's that, and
understand.
And that's the story.
Where the transformation can be.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah.
Fantastic. And what gave you this urge of having this kind of confrontation between age and gender?
So the age and gender thing, you know, as I've been working a lot with age as a theme for a little while. I worked with 2 female performers maybe about 7 years ago, and it was really stimulated as ever by me, what was going on for me in my life. Kind of being a circus artist and reaching a point in my career where I was starting to look to the future and look for role models and think about what is aging like for a circus practitioner, and seeing that basically for women it meant just falling off the edge of a cliff and never being seen again. So I became curious about where all of these women that I knew when I was starting out and looked up to had gone, and why they'd left the industry. So staged some conversations with older female performers. At the same time, I'd started working with a group of older women doing circus. So women in their 60s and 70s doing circus for pleasure, as part of just a general research about aging. And I thought it was really interesting how these 2 very different populations were having really similar conversations about visibility, about how you negotiate a changing body. You know, for the circus practitioners, there are often people who had been on the stage for most of their life, so visibility meant not just visibility in day-to-day life, but actually being forced out of a community that they'd identified with. So we made this show where I was working with 2 professional performers. One was 50 and one was 70. And we worked with a lot of older non-professional women in the development of the ideas. They didn't appear on stage, but the conversations that we had with them, which was stimulated by movement practice, fed into the structure of the show that we made. So I think I've been preoccupied by aging for a while, and I think it's also cultural as well. So I was born in Ghana and raised in a very kind of West African community in London. And the cultural attitudes to aging are very different in Ghanaian society, as particularly for matriarchs, as you get older, you become more present in the family, not less. So I was just interested. I was just interested in this difference of aging and women, and you know how you negotiate that. So aging has been a preoccupation for a while, and aging and gender are really connected, because men and women, I think, have very different experiences of getting older, and what it means to their place in the world. So that kind of sat over the top of everything I've done for a while. The separation, you know, working with a young male performer and an older female performer, was really kind of going back to that conversation about who is allowed to be strong, who is allowed to be vulnerable, who we see as having a connection with each other and being able to have meaningful relationships with each other. And I was really struck by how rare it is to see a young man and an older woman together where there isn't an obvious family relationship, and how rare it is to see tenderness and care in relationships between older women and young men when there isn't a family relationship.
Yeah, really interesting. And if we think about other artists addressing the same topic, are you inspired by the work of other artists which are perhaps in the dance world or from other dance world contexts?
I'm inspired to look at other artists who've addressed similar themes, but actually quite often I'll be looking in different media.
Yes.
So in literature, in music, sometimes film. And yeah, sometimes in movement actually, but I find it less useful for me, because I don't want to replicate what somebody else has made.
Of course. But inspiration is not to reproduce.
Absolutely, absolutely. Inspiration is not to reproduce, but I think it's really curious that actually a lot of my inspiration comes from literature or music and film, rather than actually theatre or live performance.
Yeah.
Maybe I just need to get out more.
I guess that's a personal advice, but if you want you to create, to have your own point of view, you have to be nourished, not perhaps by the field you're working in.
Yeah.
And yes, and painting, literature, is music,
Yeah.
are things which are so inspiring also. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But what I felt seeing your performance is I didn't see the complete result of it, because what I saw was just a work in progress, and it was also something that you will develop later, and I would love to speak more about that also. But I found that two things which for me are tremendously important is, first of all, that you have your own original point of view on this particular topic, and it's something that is very important for you to deal with. So this urge, I felt it even in a work in progress, and thanks you very much for that. But there's another aspect of your work which is very interesting. You're not only working with true professional artists, you're also dealing with community, and how far you are connecting this work, which was a studio work, normal studio work, research, to the community work that you were developing in another residency in the frame of the same project.
Yeah, so within the Roundabout project I was able to spend some time in Imaginarius in Santa Maria in Portugal, which was fantastic for me. So I said before that when we were making this piece, I didn't want it to be a linear piece in any way. I wanted it to be like a series of fragments of moments that are collected together, that shift, that take you somewhere, but keep that kind of sense of multiple relationships that could exist within this space. And one of the things that I always wanted to do was explore what would happen if we did have multiple pairings in a space. I've done a lot of work with non-professional performers, kind of making small pieces, but also just kind of exploring the practice of circus and movement with non-professional performers, particularly older people. But I've never translated that into a large-scale performance. So going to Porto, I went with these questions about if I was expanding the piece and having multiple presences, you know, multiple older women and young men, what might that look and feel like? And also, if I'm working with non-professional performers, how can I create a process that is worthwhile for them to take part in, because they'd be giving me their time, that was led by the artistic impulse, the thing that I wanted to create, but still gave them enough space to have creative agency within the work, was ethical, and that would produce something that I thought would make the people in the piece feel proud to share with an audience. So it was really an opportunity to experiment with not just what we might make, but how we might make it.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the results were really, really interesting. So I worked with a group of women who had previously worked on another project with Imaginarius, a spoken word and song piece, but they'd never done any movement work. And it brought them together with two young men who I don't think they'd previously worked with Imaginarius, and it was just a really, really interesting meeting. one of the things that a number of things I'm taking away was, first of all, at the end of the process, talking to one of the young men, and him talking about the surprise he felt through the process, kind of coming out feeling like he'd made friendships with people that he would never have engaged with in any other way, and making friendships that felt like they were based on parity and not the usual age-based relationships, which was really pleasing for me, because it's really important for me that if I do anything where I'm asking people to give me something, that they receive something in return. And the other thing that I'm taking away is that context is really important. Mm-hmm. So in the UK, when we presented the piece, so we've presented the work in the UK since, people have really picked up on the age, the gender, but the ethnicity has been really important in the dialogue that we've been having around the piece in the UK. When people come to talk to us afterwards, that is always something they mention. And in Portugal, actually, that was seemingly less important to people. I'm not quite sure, I'll have to think about that a little bit. But the difference in ages, like the two young men and older women together, moving closely together, supporting and lifting each other and having a degree of intimacy, I think was really surprising and challenging for some of the people that saw it, more so than I would have thought.
So is that one of the things that surprised you?
Yeah.
So the difference of interest on watching it?
Yeah.
And there is, even in the process of working with those people, there's something else that surprised you?
Yeah, the surprise for me was how separate the generations were, and how much time we spent in the first session bridging that gap and bringing people slowly closer together. After 2 sessions, those differences, they'd negotiated it and people were connecting with each other, on a human basis. But definitely it took some time to bridge that gap, which makes me feel like it's something valuable and worthwhile. So all of the practices that I use within circus became really useful. Getting people to build trust in order to take bigger risks together physically actually does the same thing emotionally as well.
Yes. So you answer my next question, but perhaps you have more so to say. How far do you think that thanks to movement the people could, or better, or more complicating, communicate on same basis?
For me, because my practice has always been movement, I find that movement is getting people to move together and finding a process to bring them in physical contact with each other, kind of building up to it slowly, is the best way for people to meet each other. And if you talk too much, differences in thinking and it appears too quickly. Our bodies actually, as human beings, we move in very, very similar ways. So it's a great way to bring people together really, really quickly. After that you can talk, but first kind of make contact with each other and just kind of realise that this is a real living person that you're working with.
Yes. So I wish all the people who are listening to you to have the possibility to meet you. So Vicki, Victoria, Amedume, thank you very, very much for this beautiful thing, and we wish to see your performance very soon.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess it's not the last time you come to Žďár and Sázavou and to the festival KoresponDance. So
fabulous.
Yes, and thank you very much.